Hi, my name's Jordan Marshall. I'm Special Projects Editor at Building Magazine, and I'm delighted to be chairing this standalone webinar session today entitled Cyber Risk in the AEC Sector. It's not if, but when. We have a really great panel for you today, who I will introduce to you in a second, but I'm going to hand over to them. So I'm just going to quickly run through some housekeeping. We'd love to say to our audience, please send through any questions you have at any time, and we'll try and answer as many of those as we can in the Q&A session at the end. And also just wanted to reiterate that this session will be available on demand within about 60 minutes at the end of the session. So if you want to double check something, if you want to share with a colleague who you think will find it valuable, please do. It'll be the same link you've joined today. So yeah, just want to get those things up off the top. So to introduce our panel today, we have Rob Smith, CTO at Creative ITC, Jason Mongat, Senior Pre-Sales Engineer at Arctic Wolf, and Mark Reed, Head of IT at RSHP. So that's probably enough for me to kick things off. So Jason, I think I'm handing over to you in the first instance. So thank you.
Thanks, Jordan, and good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us on the webinar. I thought I'd start when we're talking about cyber risk by just outlining how we sort of quantify cyber risk. And really there's kind of two sides to the equation, if you will. One is the likelihood of an incident occurring in your organization and how likely that attack is to be successful. And the other is the impact if there is an incident and what that impact is to your business. So from a likelihood perspective, it's really about how likely are you to be breached as an organization? How successful would a threat actor be if they tried to breach you? What controls have you got in place? What technology have you got in place? What people and process have you got in place? And the likelihood of an incident, we'll talk about the percentages later on, but it's more significant than you might think. The impact side of an incident, if you are breached, what is the impact of a breach? And there's obviously different types of breach. Everybody talks about ransomware, but there could also be a business email compromise. It could be a data breach. There's different types of breaches, and it's understanding what the impact would be to your business if you suffered one of those incidents. How much downtime would there be? What would be the financial impact? How would you recover, etc. So really the combination of these two, if you multiply them together, is really how we define cyber risk. The likelihood times the impact of an incident. I want to ask a question before we move on to Rob at Creative. Rob, you work with a lot of clients in the AEC sector. Can you share some of your kind of thoughts about how Creative measure the impact of breaches for customers, but also measure customers' security posture and improve their security posture?
Yeah, no, thanks, Jason. So what we normally do with the customers, firstly, establish a baseline. So that will be ideally conducted through audits and maybe some external and internal penetration testing. That depends if maybe they've already done audits such as like Cyber Essentials Plus and things like this. The aim there is to look at if they've got the right tools in the environment. So are they using tools like Arctic Wolf? And the aim there is to look at, do they have real-time analytics? Are they looking at threat intelligence? So we can look at reducing that time from detection to resolution. What we try and do to help customers then measure that posture is conduct penetration testing and threat hunting exercises after we've put tools in place. Yeah. To see what we can do for possible breach scenarios. That in turn should give us a good idea of the impact to the business, be it financial or data related. And then what we're often seeing now is also reputational, because a lot of these businesses are having to report out and announce that potentially they've been breached. And I think the most important thing for us is what we generally offer as a service isn't a one-off. It's generally ongoing, because I think the most important thing about security is it doesn't have an end date. We can't just put, it's not a project, there's no start date and end date. It's kind of forever ending.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Rob. Next slide, please, Celine. So at Arctic Wolf, what we see quite often in the industry is what we call an effectiveness gap. And what we mean by that is too often organizations, and they have to do this, but are investing an awful lot of funds into technology. And you can see on the screen some of the numbers there, like $169 billion was spent last year on cybersecurity. And there's over 3,000 vendors in the market, and the year-on-year spend is increasing, as you can see, 11% year-on-year. And yet the amount of cybercrime losses in 2022, so last year, had increased by 48%. So even though organizations are spending more and more money on more and more different types of technology and tools, that doesn't necessarily translate to more effective cyber defense, as we can see with the increase in cybercrime losses. Mark, I want to come to you and just ask a quick question around, you've recently adopted Arctic Wolf from a security operations perspective. That's a combination of people, process, and technology. But could you provide some insight to the audience on the approach you've taken with cybersecurity?
Yeah, sure, no problem. So the way we addressed it was after our initial gap analysis on our security, that with the help of Creative, it was quite apparent that the main area of concern within our industry was support for our IT team and user training. That was the key. So we looked at possibly employing people to look at our security. So, hiring people and staff and so forth. But it became apparent that this was non-viable for us. So we needed external help. So on top of that, also, our training was not great. We were doing our regular talks to the office, sending out phishing test emails, as most people do, etc. But these were quite ineffective. It became apparent we needed something more robust, and gave us the human feel as well. So people in my IT team could speak to someone at any time for advice or any concern, and someone else taking the strain and looking at what it is and the threat of what is not. We also needed a better training program for our staff. Through Creative, we were introduced to yourselves at Arctic Wolf. And to us, it was an absolute revelation. It really was. We was given access to our concierge team and a SOC that we could speak to anytime, night or day, for any concerns that we had. And that was also them ringing us and speaking to us as well. It was huge for us for that part. So, as I say, the SOC team constantly contact us on a regular basis to make sure and check in to make sure we are patching, we are making sure everything's okay. Then we come on to the training program. That was a real game changer for us. The program was more aligned with our users. We now get regular short videos every month, every couple of weeks. We get a short video explaining exactly what's going on in the industry, current threats, etc. We're also getting a lot more regular phishing tests as well. And everything's logged, and we can track and see who's doing what, and sort of if they're not doing it, we can go and ask them why, etc., and make sure that everyone is doing it.
Thanks, Mark. So yeah, it's quite a significant, change in your approach to security operations. Next slide, please, Celine. So cybercrime now is an industrial scale. You can download tools at PowerShell Empire shown here. You can get a web interface for it. There's tutorials online. It's very, very simple for people to now get into the business of cybercrime. You can get ransomware as a service capabilities. You can go and buy that service instead of working out how to do it yourself. You can see on the slide here, some information around, from Wired magazine around how TrickBot invested $20 million in their infrastructure alone to support their ransomware attacks. You can see that Conti are targeting Veeam backups. You can see that Conti again had an employee of the month. These ransomware gangs and criminals are now really large and big business. They really are like an organization that it's very difficult for many organizations to be able to defend against them. And Rob, I want to come back to you and ask a quick question, because at Creative, you've got some experience of cyber incidents that have happened to clients in the past. And I just want to understand from your perspective the impact on those clients and from a business perspective, a technology perspective, but also from a people perspective.
Yeah, no, sure. I think a lot of the clients that maybe have approached us in the past 12 months, it's normally after they've had an attack, and chances are a lot of these businesses didn't have kind of backups, DR plans in place. So I think the first thing that surprises them, I think, is how efficient the threat actors are at carrying out what they do.
Yeah.
So what we've seen in the past 12 months is these threat actors tend to be in the accounts or in the customer base for 6 months, 2 months, 3 months, but they'll be there. They're building out a plan, they're mapping out the infrastructure, they're seeing how they can get in and out, they're creating backup plans just in case they get discovered and they can get in a different way. So when they go to execute their plan, it's almost like they're executing an IT project sort of thing. There's going to be a project manager and all sorts in the background to actually establish and get this done. We find a lot of the attacks tend to happen overnight, which has been quite interesting for us to see. So it generally is when the IT staff are going to be in bed. There's no one online to see it happening. So generally you wake up in the morning and it's all done. And I think the thing that I've seen most people be surprised at, I think, is how much they managed to do as well. So I think the past 3 that we've seen in the past 6 months, they've started encrypting the ESXi hosts. They go after the storage. They're going after the backups if the backups aren't immutable and somewhere else in the organization. So when these businesses find out they've been attacked, it's normally pretty much game over. If they haven't got a really structured backup plan in place and they haven't got disaster recovery and they don't have a plan, it's generally not days, it's weeks or months before these businesses are recovered. And a lot of these businesses are small businesses. So we look after everything from kind of £1 million businesses up to hundreds of millions of pounds. But the revenue loss for these companies and the reputational damage tends to be fairly large. And I think the impact on people has been really interesting to see as well. So I think from a morale point of view and a communication point of view out to staff, I think that's really important that that's part of the kind of business continuity plan, or the plan that they have if someone is going to plan for this and have a plan in place if they have a cyber incident. Because how does staff work after the incident? So are they going to come into the office and do nothing, or are you going to leave them at home? A lot of that, if you try and do that while you're in the middle of a cyber attack, most people put that to the side because that's not really the important bit why the business is trying to recover. And then the people will feel forgotten. So I think that the people bit there, as odd as it sounds, is probably the most important bit, really.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've like you, have met, unfortunately, more than one organisation that's been attacked in the past. And yeah, it's the impact on people that's so often kind of overlooked, if you like. Next slide, please, Celine. Okay. So what I've included here is just some statistics from Arctic Wolf Labs. So Arctic Wolf Labs is our threat intelligence organisation at Arctic Wolf, and we've got a threat report in 2023 that we produced on what we saw in 2022 and what we expected to see going forward into this year, and that's available for you to download on the webinar. Mid-year, we've released a blog, and you can see the URL at the bottom of the screen here. We released this blog to just give an update on what we'd seen in the first half of 2023. And there's several statistics on here, but if we start with the top left, you can see that the threat actor groups that we see out there in the first half of 2023. Lockbit is still the most prevalent group. It's grown 17% year over year from the same period last year. You can see Clop is there. There was a Move IT was a file transfer software application and a vulnerability that the Clop ransomware group jumped on, and actually I think they got about 69 organizations ransomware just from this one vulnerability alone. You can also see it's 43% increase over the second half of 2022. So the attacks are going up. Construction is in the top 10. So obviously this is an AEC an event, and the construction you can see is in the top 10, not the top. Thankfully, but it is in the top 10. And predominantly it's English-speaking countries that are attacked. So organisations that are in the US, in the UK, in Australia, in Canada, etc. Albeit it's across the board, but the most prevalent attacks are going in the English-speaking companies. So the median initial ransom demand from these threat acting groups is about $600,000. And again, you can see construction here is actually the lowest in the report that we did in the first half of this year, at $215,000, but still a very significant amount, and it is just a median amount. On the right-hand side, you can see that the small, medium enterprises, SMEs, are really taking the brunt of attacks. So users were less than 1,000, organizations with less than 1,000 users in the organization taking the majority of the attacks, and that's perhaps not unsurprising given the resources that larger companies might have. Next slide, please, Celine. So even though SMEs are taking kind of the brunt, the large companies are getting attacked as well. And there's just a few examples on the slide here that you can see. So, You know, Okta, Uber, and Rackspace, not very large companies that you would think would have the resources to be able to defend. But, you know, in each of these different attack types, and I'm not going to go into too much detail, you know, Okta was a supply chain attack. Uber was a user account that was compromised on their personal device. Rackspace was a vulnerability that wasn't patched because they were concerned about applying that patch. The common theme between all of these companies is that it's not necessarily the technology, missing or bad tools that they had in their environment. It's the fact that it's typically people and process that has been affected. Another example of this very recently, last week, MGM, large casino organization in the US, was ransomwared again. I happened to be in Vegas last week, and actually to see a casino floor that was entirely empty, and the impact that had on their business was significant. There's estimates between $4 and $8 million a day that they're losing whilst that's down. So it's not just small companies that are being attacked; it could be large companies as well. Next slide, please, Celine. So how do you work out the impact to your organization? So here's an example case study.
Jason,
yes.
Sorry, do you mind holding for 1 second? We've just had an issue with the slides, so I'm going to take over sharing from Celine. If you just hold on for a sec so that I can pull them up for everybody.
Yeah, okay, no problem. I guess just while we're waiting for those slides to come up, I'll talk about the next slide that I was going to talk through. And it's an example of an attack against the Irish Health Service, so the HSE in Ireland, that occurred in 2021. And there was a post-attack report written by PwC.
Those should be fine now, Jason.
Okay, I can't see the slides myself, but hopefully they're up on the screen for the audience. So the HSE was attacked in 2021, and hopefully you can see on the screen that there was a report from PwC. I'll put the URL on the report, and you can download it. I'd recommend download it and having a read. The interesting thing about this attack was, the ransomware group were inside the organization for 2 months before the actual impact stage, before the ransomware was executed, before the encryption was executed. So 2 months they were inside the network. A bit like you were saying, Rob. More often than not, they can be inside the network for longer than people think.
Yeah.
And actually, again, it comes back to, they had the technology, they had the tools, and the alerts were there, but they weren't actioned, and people didn't action the alerts that were there. They were actually spotted in a few of the hospitals, in 3 of the hospitals, I think it was. But the impact to the Irish Health Service was it took them 4 months in total to get back up, fully recovered. And the projected costs are astronomical to them. I think the takeaway here is, again, it's not just technology; it's people and process that's important. I can see the slides now, so if we could move on to the next one. Okay, perfect. So what's the cost of a breach to your organization? So we have a calculator on our website. You can see the URL again. So calculating the cost of the breach on arcticwolf.com. And what I thought I'd do for the webinar, I just run a quick set of numbers and see how they come out. So I've done it for construction in the UK, 300 users in the organisation and £15 million worth of revenue. And you can see the 3 different types of breaches and the potential cost, the estimated cost based on sort of real world numbers. Ransomware is about £800,000. Business email compromise, 300,000, and data breach is near 400,000 pounds. And these are kind of the impact cost financially to the organizations. It's interesting when you look at ransomware, it's not all about just a ransomware payment. It's the recovery costs, it's the time to recover, it's business losses, it's legal, it's credit monitoring, etc. So a lot of costs come down to first party costs. What I've also added on the slide is the percentage likelihood of an organization suffering one of these types of breaches. And we know this from close work that we do with our incident response organization and also with the cyber insurance organizations that we work with. So ransomware is a 9% likelihood, business email compromise is 6%, and data breach is 15%. So much higher than perhaps what people think. And if you think of all these 3 together, what's the annualized risk that an organization could possibly face? If you take not the total cost, but the total cost times the percentage, the combined annualized risk of these three kind of breaches comes out at £150,000. Now, what's also interesting that come out recently, and you can find this yourself on Twitter if you go and look at VX Underground, is one of the ransomware groups, Lockbit, recently polled its affiliates. So polled some of the affiliates and organizations that it works with. And the reason it polled them was because quite often threat actor negotiators, so we have a digital forensic and incident response organization that will do the threat actor negotiations, will try to reduce that ransomware payment. You can see here it's £218,000, the estimate for this particular organization size. And what they wanted to do is really poll their affiliates to make sure that they weren't reducing the ransom payment. And one of their affiliates, the National Hazard Agency, has actually come out and said they are now going to ransom organizations for 3% of their annual revenue. And they've publicly said this, and they're not going to reduce that ransom payment. So if you look at an organization that's £15 million in annual revenue, you're looking at a £450,000 ransom that's not going to be reduced. So that hopefully this gives you an idea of what the impact could be from a financial perspective. The calculator's on our website. You can go and have a look at that and use it for your own organization. Next slide, please, Celine. So will cyber threats always land on an endpoint? When we think about attacks, and we think about data breaches, and by an endpoint, I mean a server or a client, by the way. We think about encryption on the endpoint, we think about data breaches from the endpoint. And that's not always the case. From our perspective, you really need to look at your infrastructure from a holistic perspective. Next slide, please. And when we say from a holistic perspective, what we mean is, yes, you need to look at the endpoint. Yes, you need your EDR and endpoint protection tooling in place. But your attack surface is much larger these days, right? So it's not just what it was historically behind your perimeter firewalls. You need to look at your network. You need to look at cloud from both an IaaS perspective, but also from a SaaS perspective, Office 365, for example. You need to look at identity, and you need to look at user behavior. You need to look at different log sources, or all of the security log sources you've got, and you need to bring those together to get that holistic view across your environment. Next slide, please. And if we could just build this one up. So this is an example of a cloud breach attack chain. And what's really important is the earlier in the attack that you can detect a threat actor, the more likely you can there stop it before it gets to an impact stage. So you can look at like external risks, your websites. Have you got any vulnerabilities on your websites that can be exploited by a threat actor? You can look at your external facing firewall. You can look at identity of threat actors trying to elevate their privileges within your identity systems, whether that be Active Directory, Azure Active Directory, or other. Your SaaS applications, Office 365 is a classic example. Is there a business email compromise? Are they trying to exfiltrate data from Office 365? Looking at public cloud, obviously all of us have some infrastructure, typically have some infrastructure in the cloud now. So looking at your IaaS environment, looking at your external perimeter, your firewall, looking at your internal network, and then looking at your endpoint. So the percentages that are shown here are where initial indicators of compromise for Arctic Wolf raised incidents come from. And you can see it's not just on the endpoint, right? If you have that holistic visibility across the whole attack chain, you've got many more opportunities to be able to detect a threat actor prior to them, early in the kill chain before they get to that impact stage. I want to ask another question. Mark, this one's for you. I want to ask, if you could describe how you managed the alerts that used to come out of your security tools, and how early in the kill chain were you able to detect threat actors in your environment?
So looking at your slide, sort of, our previous solutions had a lot of this, a lot of these elements that Arctic Wolf have as well. The issue we had in more than ways than one was we had so much data coming at us, from all areas. It's great that it's all being monitored and we could capture it, and our team was starting to trawl through that data and trying to understand what a risk may be or what is a false positive. Then having to assess that risk, so it's very, very slow because there's so much data coming through and you just couldn't get to grips with it. Like I say, with a small team like we have, it was hard to keep on top of. Hence why when we went to Arctic Wolf, all that was taken away from us. In all areas of the system, there was monitoring all areas, all parts of it. And we could see on the system in more sort of layman terms of those potential risks. And we could, go to that risk and assess it and make a change as needed. And also getting advice on that change from Arctic Wolf. You know, with the SOC, we had the benefit of working, you know, all that work being done in the background. And like I say, them informing us if we need to make a change, and make sure that if we are making a change, it's for the right reasons, and, you know, so forth. So that's sort of how we now do, how we now bring it to the forefront now.
Yeah, that's really good. Thank you, Mark. Next slide, please. So this is kind of a summary. If you look at a cloud breach attack chain, and, you know, often it will start from, you know, not inside your network like it used to. 45% of tickets and incidents include cloud and identity. So 45% of Arctic Wolf tickets include some element of cloud and some element some element of identity. So you really do need to look at, you know, look at that full attack surface in your environment. Next slide, please. So what are the cybersecurity challenges that organisations are facing? And I'm sure many of you on the call, you know, resonate with many of these challenges. These are the ones we typically see when we talk to organisations. I'm not going to go into all of the detail of all of them. I'd pick out a couple. One was, you know, limited access to skills and people. Mark, you touched on that. Then you've got the skills and people, but have you got enough to look at it consistently, you know, and sift through all of that data? It's a very common challenge that we hear when we talk to organisations. And again, it comes back to there's investment in technology, but not necessarily enough investment in the people and the process side that's required for effective security operations. The other one that's quite interesting, I think, we're seeing more of, is the need to demonstrate compliance and security posture. So we're talking to more organisations now that are getting supply chain questionnaires, so not just from their cyber insurance for, you know, cyber insurance renewals, which are obviously increasing and coverage is going down. And being able to prove your security posture to your cyber insurer to reduce that increase, but also from supply chain. So, you know, to be effective in business now, people are actually, you know, sending out questionnaires to say, if you want to do business with us in our supply chain, you need to prove your security posture. Again, that's something that we help organisations with, but something that we're seeing much more common. And I guess a question for both Mark and for Rob, for both of you, if you could just describe some of the key challenges in your environment, Mark, inside your organisation, and Rob, what you see in your customers' organisations.
Shall I start? So,
yeah.
You know, to be honest, every day is a challenge. You know, you're forever looking over your shoulder. You know, you always want to make sure that, you know, everything's secure. As the head of IT, you know, I'm responsible for the security of the practice, of course. And so you're always asking yourself, you know, have you put in the correct hardware or the software to stop an attack? You know, as I say to the staff, we can put in thousands, millions of pounds worth of, you know, equipment, software, etc. But at the end of the day, in my eyes, it's the users that are the weakest link in the you know, in the whole chain. You know, that's why we are focusing so much on cyber training to our staff, to ensure that they're aware of the risks and what can potentially mean to the business. And if we ever had a breach, you know, if that ever happened, what it means to the business as well.
Thanks, Mark. I think, yeah, the people side is really important. I'd actually say that your first line of defense versus the weakest link, but, you know, it depends how you look at it.
Absolutely.
And Rob, from your perspective.
Yeah, no problem. So I think the first thing that we generally see, especially in the AEC industry, is complexity. So there tends to be lots of applications, lots of services, potentially bespoke applications and unsupported ones. So obviously that ends up being a breeding ground for vulnerabilities, but also just adds to the general complexity of the environment. I think the next one, it's always a boring one, but compliance. Yep. I think we see lots of practices at the minute that are or that do have Cyber Essentials Plus, and I think it's something that I'm a big advocate about. For not just as a paperwork exercise, but it's really important that businesses are embracing everything that's in Cyber Essentials Plus. So it shouldn't be seen as one of those things as a bit of paper so we can do some bids on some RFPs, for example, if it's a requirement. It really needs to be a priority for the business. It gives confidence to the boards that you're taking it seriously, and it's a really good stepping stone into something like ISO 27001 if that's what your business is looking to go for. But I think compliance is something that it is a big challenge, and it is sometimes quite difficult for smaller companies to get that in place. And I'm going to sound like I'm repeating myself as well as Mark is, but people, I think, like Mark said, you can have the best technology on the planet, but if employees aren't on board, you probably don't have much chance really, because they are your first line of defense. I always say it's almost like you're building a human firewall. They they really need to be reporting emails into IT. If you've got a report email in Outlook, they need to be picking up the phone if they've had an odd phone call from service desk that doesn't sound like it's from service desk. I think that the breach that you said that was out in Vegas, MGN, I think I read in the paper, I don't know how true it is, but that breach was someone calling into the help desk and managed to get someone's password reset and the 2FA disabled. So I think it just shows that social engineering bit is probably the bit where all businesses are, well, it's the biggest weakness. I won't say all businesses are weak at it, but it's the biggest weakness. So I think challenges are always multi-layered, but I think that the biggest one is people. I think if there was something I'd pick out of 3 of those that I've mentioned is people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, the internet was designed so people would open emails, click on links. People, I mean, that is the internet and how it's been designed, right? That's human nature. That's what's going to happen. You have to expect that that's going to happen. But if you can educate people to be aware of the risks, number one, but number two, and most importantly, is if they click on something and they realize that they've, you know, clicked on the wrong link or opened, you know, the wrong document, they put the hand up and tell you straight away. Because if they tell you straight away, you can do something about it. If they don't put the hand up and they hope that you don't notice, that's when your organization, that's when your business is at risk. So yeah, I absolutely concur with that. Thank you. Next slide, please. So how, you know, how do organizations go about addressing this risk, this cyber risk that we're all facing? So if you look at the total risk, I think you can mitigate an awful lot of the risk that you're facing as an organization. You can aggregate your technology together. So Arctic Wolf have, you know, we have a platform where we aggregate all your security telemetry together. So you have that single pane of glass, to use quite an old phrase, to look at all of those security tools in one place, versus having to look across, you know, 15, maybe 20 different user interfaces to triage and correlate alerts that are coming out of those systems. But I think probably, and we've talked about this, the most important thing is that people and process, being able to inject that skills, that 24/7 capability into the organization, and that process to become really effective with the technology that you've invested in. The combination of, you know, technology being aggregated and the skills and the process, I think, mitigates maybe 98, 99% of the cyber risk that organizations face. I think any cybersecurity vendor that says we can guarantee 100%, you know, that we're going to protect you against everything is being disingenuous. That's just not how cybersecurity works. But I think you can go a long way towards that mitigation, and to what you said, Rob. There's you know, there's frameworks, there's compliance frameworks, Cyber Essentials Plus, ISO 27001, etc., that can really give you a framework to start addressing the process side of this as well. There's always going to be some residual risk in an environment, and that's where you can transfer that risk. So you know, have an organization that does digital forensic and incident response to do that recovery, to find the root point of compromise and do the business recovery to minimize the impact. And there can be some financial risk transfer as well. Cyber insurance is a classic example of that, where there's some financial you know, recovery that you can, or financial you know, that you can call on in the case of a real incident, and warranties as well. At Arctic Wolf, we do a security operations warranty, up to $1 million worth of warranty. So there's, you know, the combination of mitigating the majority of the risk, 98, 99% of it, and then transferring that residual to experts or financially, will allow you to address that total risk. Next slide, please. So how do we drive positive security outcomes? And obviously this is what we do from an Arctic Wolf perspective, but it doesn't matter if you were adopting a third-party service like Arctic Wolf or you were trying to build this capability yourself. I think this slide is quite useful to look at the people in the process in a bit more detail. We know the technology well. We spend a lot of money on technology. There's a lot of technology choices out there. And people like Creative can help you with those choices. But, you know, if you from a third party or to build it yourself, it does take a lot of people to be effective in cybersecurity. If you think about aggregating all of your security telemetry together, you need some sort of platform to do that in, whether it's on-prem or whether it's in the cloud. But then how do you implement that platform, maintain that platform? Threat intelligence is needed in that platform, and you need to do continual detection engineering because threats evolve on a daily basis. And that takes people to maintain that platform. And then, of course, once you've got the platform, you need somebody to look at the platform. You need the Security Operations Center, or the SOC, which gives you that 24/7 coverage. Gartner say 8 to 12 people are required to run a SOC. Even if you take a minimum viable SOC to get 24/7, you're looking at, you know, probably 8 people in all honesty. And they're the ones that are going to do the security investigations. They're going to remove the false positives. They're going to find the real incidents and then do the remediation for them. So that gives you your coverage, but then there's security engineering. How do you continually improve? Cybersecurity is not a set and forget. It's an ongoing, evolving concern. And so you need some security engineering to look at your posture analysis, to do those incremental improvements to continually make you stronger. And of course, in the worst case scenario, incident response. What do you do around full digital forensic and incident response and business recovery if the worst case happens? So a lot more, I think, from the people perspective than perhaps many people realize. From a process perspective, which is equally as important, we talked about having that single security view, aggregating all of your security sources together to make it very easy to find real incidents in your environment. But that can be really beneficial from a compliance and from an audit perspective as well, if you've got all that data in one place and you can easily access it. Your strategy, your security engineering, those ongoing security improvements. And this is where, to your point, Rob, cybersecurity frameworks really come into place. And it doesn't matter if you start with Cyber Essentials or ISO 27001, you could use NIST, you could use CIS controls. There's a load of different frameworks out there. But these are workbooks really to get you going and really help you focus on where to improve your cybersecurity posture. Incident response is probably the most important thing you can take away from the session today. Have an incident response plan, test your incident response plan, reach out to a third party if you need assistance with either creating a plan, that incident response capability, or in testing it. It's really important that you know who's responsible, who's going to do what your infrastructure is at the point that there is an incident, because that's going to reduce the time it takes to recover from an incident, and that's going to reduce the impact to your business. If there's one thing to take away, it's really have a good incident response plan in place. And then finally, reporting. Who needs to see what information and what about? So really, people, process, and technology is kind of a combination of what you need to be effective from a security perspective. So next slide, please. So just one final slide for myself. I just want to talk about security operations from our perspective. We've kind of talked through this. Where most customers we talk to, and most organizations we talk to are, defense in depth. They have lots of technology in place, layered technology, which is good. They need that technology, but not really in the target state that they want to be, where they're very resilient as a business, where they're very proactive around their approach to cybersecurity, that ongoing incremental improvement, not necessarily really confident that they can detect an incident in their environment and then know how to, contain that threat and recover any impact from that threat. And that's really where security operations come in: people, process, and technology. And as I say, use a cybersecurity framework as a map, if you like, to move you from that defense in depth state to the target state. But it's not just about cyber risk. It's much wider from a business resilience. And Rob, I think you're going to just touch on that as well.
Sure.
Next slide, please, Salim. Thanks.
So I think something I see when I go around and speak to owners of businesses, CIOs, heads of IT, is that business resilience in itself isn't an option anymore. It's a must, and the business expect it. A lot of them expect it to be driven from IT, which maybe isn't the best plan in the world, but it's where sometimes it sits. So I wanted to cover off, I guess, a few bits that I think can help towards that and set people on the right course. So much the whole presentation, what we've been really talking about is SOCAS, so Security Operations as a Service. Like Jason mentioned, super expensive and labor intensive if you were to do this in-house. So having the ability to outsource this, have proactive monitoring, instant response, the team that Jason spoke about, the concierge team, that's a team that's dedicated to your environment, that knows your environment inside out. If you pick up the phone, it's generally 2 or 3 individuals, depending how big your environment is or more. I think that's really helpful, and that helps businesses. Next up is X as a service. So I think during one of my slides, I was talking about where a few businesses have been compromised and they went after the backups and the disaster recovery. I think looking at X as a service, if you don't have the skills in-house to look at something immutable, so if you can't have that air gap or that virtual air gap, is look at X as a service for backup, disaster recovery, desktop services, just in case you need your staff to work while you're recovering from an incident. Having that all separated from your organization could form part of a really resilient plan for you guys. managed services. If you don't have the skills in house, I think managed services are much more than technical services. They can be compliance, it can be security, it can be planning sessions, it can be road mapping out your security architecture over the next 3 to 5 years, and that's something that we or other MSPs can help with. And then I think the most important one is planning. I think the businesses that we see that don't necessarily maybe have all the tools, but they have plans in place, tend to recover a lot quicker. Without the planning being in place, it generally ends up like headless chickens running around. And there are a lot of the instances that we tend to get called into if we've not dealt with a customer before to help them their posture, and we get called in after the incident's occurred. A lot of the time is actually just taking a deep breath and sitting down and taking an hour or two to actually come up with a plan. How are we going to get to day 2, day 3, week 1, week 2, etc. So I think much like I said about security earlier, resilience is definitely, it doesn't have a finished date. You can't treat it like a project, and it's all about, I guess, a continued strategy for safeguarding your business. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you all so much for that. It was a great in-depth presentation. I do want to apologise. The platform had a slight error for the slides for certain viewers. It wasn't the entire audience, but for those who were affected, they are available via download via the resources tab, so you can double check anything that you want to there. And if you have any questions, please send those through now, and we'll try and answer as many of those off as we can the next 20 minutes. But the benefit for me of being the chair is that I can pop a couple of questions through to kick things off. So Mark, I would love to ask you first. You touched on people and the need to engage your users through training. Could you elaborate a little more on how the training has changed people's approach to cyber risks?
Yeah, absolutely. If we step back a bit before, sort of, as I was saying in the presentation earlier, sort of, our previous way that we used to do training and so forth was me standing up in front of everybody, telling them sort of what the risks are, sending the odd phishing email here and there, just to see if, people are aware. And as I say, it was really ineffective, sort of, engaging with Arctic Wolf, and now having the new training, we're now seeing people are much more engaged with it. They can understand and see the risks that are around. There are short videos that come out, like I say, that people are now watching on a regular basis. And they're actually talking within their teams as well. It's quite amazing, actually, that people are talking within their team saying, oh, have you seen the latest video? Have you seen this? Did you catch that phishing email or not? So people are really engrossing it. And we're also seeing a lot more staff now emailing IT, similar to what Rob was saying, sort of, we're a bit unsure about this email. Can you check it out? Have you seen this? Have you seen that? And so, if I look back sort of at the beginning of the year, I was saying to someone the other day, sort of when we first started these phishing tests and so forth, a lot of people were being caught out. And I mean, a lot of people were getting caught out. Now it's very, very minimal, if any at all. People are really becoming aware of it. So there's been a huge shift in our environment. And I think that's really, really what we've really focused on for this year, because we knew that the infrastructure and so forth, the security platforms we was putting in was working. It will work, but the training was the key. And I can't, like we've all said in this presentation, people are the key elements of this, and it's the one you really need to focus on the most.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. Rob, one for you quickly. All businesses are aiming to be resilient from a cyber perspective and in general. Can you provide an example how you've helped a customer achieve this?
Yeah, I guess it would be what I was talking about earlier with Jason. So I think, I suppose you could kind of have 4 actions that you were looking at. So ideally conduct a security audit. So identify vulnerabilities. Then you're going to be looking at getting some sort of tool. So as we're on the call talking about Arctic Wolf, it makes sense to go get Arctic Wolf. So that's your SIEM and your SOC. That's for your real-time monitoring analytics. Then you want to go away and develop BCP plans, so business continuity plan, looking at backups, disaster recovery, making sure they're air-gapped, because the last thing you want is someone in the environment, if they do get in, heaven forbid, that then they gain access to your backups and your DR, because then it really is game over for your business. Much like Mark was just saying, cybersecurity training is really, really important. The emails are important. Getting people to call into the business and into the service desk to try and get them to reset people's passwords that are important in the business, to try and impersonate them or do something else with those accounts. I'd say going through those steps, kind of 1 to 4, it sounds super simple, but it's going to take many months to do. We normally see businesses take about 6 months to go, I guess, end to end with that sort of journey, because the training the people is probably the hardest bit, really, because there's going to be people that come kicking the streaming, and then there's going to be people that just come along for the journey. But it's a long-term commitment. But I think if you can get the right partner involved, the right software, get people's buy-in, you could significantly improve your posture within 6 months easily.
Excellent, thank you. No, that's really helpful advice for the audience. Jason, next one for you. You've talked about the current threats Arctic Wolf Lab see. What advice can you share with the audience on how they can keep ahead of threats that face their business?
Yeah, that's a great question. So number one, we've got the Arctic Wolf Labs threat report. I think that's available on the webcast for people to download. I'd encourage everybody on the webcast to download and have a read of that. It's an insightful report. It's worth reading. It's based on deep research that we've done through Arctic Wolf Labs to understand what's happening in terms of threats, how they're happening, and what we see going forward. Again, there was the blog that I mentioned with some of the stats halfway through the year that you can also look, but definitely have a look at the Arctic Wolf Labs threat report. I guess for me, and I said it during the presentation, the most important thing that any organization can do is have an incident response plan and test that incident response plan. Because, in the worst case scenario, which you've got to assume breach happens, make sure you know what your plan is. Make sure you know how you're going to recover, because time counts. And if you think about the impact to your business operations, and if you have a plan, you're going to reduce the time that you're going to be impacted. So definitely have that incident response plan in place.
Brilliant. We've got some questions coming in from the audience, so I will put these ones to you guys. So we've had a question come in that asks, how does cyber risk mitigation take form in the world of legacy applications and platforms? Is there a key integration point between visibility and mitigation/migration? Also, is there a tipping point where certain levels of legacy within an organization change the approach to cybersecurity and resilience?
So let me take that one. First one, I'll have a first stab at it. So there's always going to be legacy in the customer's organization. I mean, that's almost a given, really. It'd be great if everybody was greenfield and had, secure applications from day one. That's the objective, right? Shift left and build secure applications, and therefore you build it into it. But you're always going to have some legacy. I guess the interaction between visibility monitoring and mitigation migration is interesting. Yes, you need the visibility and you need the monitoring that we've talked about with 24/7 security operations, something that Arctic Wolf can provide or others can provide, or you can build yourself. But you need more than that. You need to be proactive around those mitigations. You need to consistently look at your environment and then put in controls and mitigations in place for some of those legacy applications. I think that's absolutely key for organizations to do. And the first step in doing that is understand what assets you've got, what applications you've got, what data you've got, and where it is, and what controls you therefore need to put in place. You won't be able to patch everything. There'll be old applications that don't have patches available.
Brilliant. Okay, so now we've got another very eager participant who has a couple of questions. So I'll go through them one at a time, if that's okay, just to keep things simple. How much of a priority... So this person's talking about the construction industry, and how much of a priority do you think the construction industry currently sees cybersecurity as? And is there anything that's happened in the industry which has prompted action to be taken? Or is it more as a result of, there has been quite well publicized attacks within the sector?
I think maybe we'll do this between me and Jason, but I think we've seen a few publicized attacks in the industry, and I think that has made a lot of AEC companies that we at least work with sit up and take action. So actually go to their board, get support from the board as well, because I think something that Mark maybe doesn't struggle with, but I think a lot of other heads of ITs and IT directors do, is budget. Budget is really important, and actually getting the attention of the board to tell them how important it is to have that budget sliced to one side. It's not touched, and it is for security. It is probably one of the big challenges that we see. And I think when incidents do happen, especially if they're in your industry, it probably makes that discussion a bit easier. I don't know what Jason and Mark think.
From a client's point of view, sort of, like Rob said, within RSHP, we are very focus on security within the practice. You know, we've seen a number of companies within the industry being attacked and breached and so forth. And, you know, we always want to try and make sure that we are not part of one of those numbers as much as possible. So we will always try and invest as much as we can within it. You know, like Rob said, a lot of companies struggle on that part. You know, a lot of partners and directors and so forth within companies feel that the money should be spent elsewhere on other things, when really security of your practice is the most prominent thing. It's the most important thing. Because in the long run, if you are breached, if you haven't got a plan, you've not got any backups or anything like that, you know, you're going to really, really struggle to actually come back to work. I think that's my focus.
Yeah, I think just to add one final comment to that, and it kind of to your point, Rob, as well, is, and you know, explaining to the board or the partners what the impact is of a breach and the likelihood of a breach. You know, that cyber risk equation we talked about at the start is really important to educate the board. That's the responsibility of the IT team to educate the board. They may be aware of it from a headline perspective and a news perspective, but not actually how likely it is to happen in your organization. I talked about the cost of a calculator breach during the presentation. It's available on our website. Go and have a play of it. It's free. It's not behind a paywall. You don't have to put your user details in or anything. Go and have a play of it and see what the impact of those different types of breaches are. We can do much more detailed analysis for organizations should they want us to, but, you know, you can do this for free on the website. And then just, you know, talk to the board and say, you know, this is the impact of potential attacks. And this is the likelihood. You saw the percentages in the presentation, because I think that makes it a bit more real when facts and figures are put against it, if you like.
Brilliant. And so the second part of this person's question was for you, Rob, but obviously if other people have thoughts afterwards, please feel free to jump in. And it was about advocacy for Cyber Essentials Plus. And I was sort of wondering, you know, how much impact, what are the risks of not going for the Plus IG, just the baseline Cyber Essentials? How much benefit is there to be gained by going for the, you know, the Plus version?
I think the main, I won't say it's the only difference, but the main difference between Plus and not having Plus is the baseline version is almost self-certified. So there's some evidence that you might need to present, but you essentially would do a self-assessment questionnaire that you fill out, send off to an organization that's certified to sign it off, and you get your certificate back. There's obviously room for interpretation there internally, that you're marking your own homework at the end of the day. Whereas if you go for Cyber Essentials Plus, there's hands-on technical validation of what you're saying in that audit effectively, and all the controls that are within that kind of framework are being adhered to. So you get held to account by an external body, which I think, again, if the point of maybe doing the Cyber Essentials Plus is almost to advocate for more security in the business, having external verification of what controls you are or you aren't meeting, and then suggested improvements, again, for a head of IT or IT director, is probably really useful to go back to the board with and gain more budget or just more time.
Absolutely. Jason, Mark, did either of you want to come in there, or do you think that sort of covers that one off?
No, I think it pretty much covers it. I think, you know, Cyber Essentials is predominantly for external attacks. So it's looking at your external, your firewalls and so forth, whereas Cyber Essentials Plus is looking not only that, but also your internal network and ensuring that people are using, you know, 2FA, they're using that everything's being patched, you're up to the latest software within your environment, not just externally to stop an attack. So it looks at all elements. And like Rob said, to have someone come in and assess it, you're not self-marking, makes a huge difference. And, you know, once you do get that certificate, you can sort of hold your head up high, to be honest.
Brilliant. Okay, cool. We've had another one come in about sort of ransomware and whether that needs to be a specific plan or whether that can work into the wider incident planning and response planning. So is there any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll take this one. So yeah, your incident response plan should include ransomware and cover ransomware. And there probably will be a specific section on ransomware within your incident response plan, because there's things you need to decide upfront. You don't want to be deciding in the middle of a ransomware attack. And I'll give you a very simple example. Are you going to pay the ransom? Now, we would never advocate that you pay the ransom, but it's a discussion you've got to have with your board before you're in that situation. I'll give you another really simple example. How are you going to communicate in the middle of a ransomware attack? because you don't want to be using your corporate communication systems because you can assume that they've been breached. We've heard examples of exactly that, where some of our DFI, our digital forensic and incident response teams, were working with an organisation, not an Arctic Wolf customer, but just through cyber insurance organisation. And the CEO of a particular organisation was very keen to get the business up and running, and just said there was negotiations between the threat actor group and the organisation, or the DFII organisation, to reduce the ransomware costs. And what actually happened was the CEO emailed the people involved and said, just pay them whatever they need. I just need my business up and running. And of course, the threat actors are looking at their email, and now they know that they're not going to reduce the ransom. It's very simple things like that that you need to make sure are included.
Brilliant, thank you. We've had another question come in from an architect who's a sole practitioner, but I think is quite applicable because there's obviously so many firms within the AEC or sector that are on a smaller scale than, you know, huge companies. What are some of the very first steps on a small budget that you think can be sort of the key tasks, like the key aims for, you know, smaller businesses in the sector?
I can pick some of that up. So I think if we're talking kind of lone workers, in a way, it's probably a nice position to be in, because I think, much like me and Jason have, and Mark, to be fair, have said, the most important thing is the people. So I think the first thing would be to make sure you're being very vigilant about emails. So if you've got suppliers that are emailing and to change bank details and things like that, you're double checking those sorts of emails. You're not just randomly opening ones. Phone calls, being careful with those, having antivirus software that's up to date, definitely having backups and having that off-site if you can, or at least to an external hard drive off your laptop that you unplug and keep somewhere. So then that way it's immutable, effectively, it's kept to one side. And then if it's kind of SMB, so we're talking to a company maybe got sub 100 employees, that's where Arctic Wolf does play really well, to be honest. The way that the pricing is done, it's all per user or per server. So from a scalability point of view, Arctic Wolf scales with the business. So from very small businesses to very large businesses, that scales there. So yeah, I'm just thinking from a...
I think I'd concur with everything you said there, Rob, that, you know, do the basics, get the basics right, whether you're a lone practitioner or whether you're an SMB or whether you're a larger enterprise, get the basics right. You know, make sure you've got a password manager and you've got your password secure. You know, take care of your passwords. Make sure you've got MFA implemented. These are all the same controls that organizations, regardless of size, should do, whether it's a lone practitioner or whether it's a larger company.
Brilliant. Okay, I'm very conscious we've only got a few minutes left and we've covered a lot of ground. So what I might ask each of our speakers to do now is sort of, if you were wanting to leave the audience, you know, with one or two key points. Jason, I know you've mentioned already, you know, the one thing that you would like to keep away, but maybe you want to reiterate that and add anything else. And then we'll swing past the others just to, you know, leave the key points at top of mind at the end of the session.
Yeah, so I'll go first because it's pretty obvious what mine is, which is make sure you've got an incident response plan. Make sure you've tested your incident response plan. If you need assistance with planning that incident response plan, that's something Arctic Wolf and Creative can help you with. So engage with us and we can do that. And we can do that for, you know, for a very reasonable fee. But make sure you've got that plan in place. It is absolutely the most important point for me.
Brilliant. Mark, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, totally. I think mine is, from a user perspective, I think, you know, make sure that your users are trained and they understand a cyber risk. You know, it's most important from a business point of view that your users understand exactly what is happening, how to look for something. That is really my take. People are a single point of failure effectively, and they need to make sure that they know exactly what's going on.
Brilliant. Thanks. And last but not least, Rob?
Mark and Jason took my ones. I can't believe it. I think my one, actually, think a bit differently, would be talking to peers in the industry that you're in. So one thing I like working with the AEC industry is the fact that a lot of the heads of IT and the IT directors talk. I think that's really important. And it's not about being, because there's lots of competitive between the industry, obviously, but actually we're all in the same boat when it comes to cybersecurity. So actually talking to your peers and seeing what they're doing. There's not many AC companies that I know that will keep that super secret from other practices, if that makes sense, because they appreciate they're all in the same boat at the end of the day. So I think that would be my key takeaway is talk to your peers.
Brilliant. I'd like to reiterate the messages coming from the audience to say thanks to Mark, Jason, and Rob for a really informative session. It's been great. I've learned a lot just listening in. Also, thanks to our audience for your questions and your participation. We're really grateful for that. Also, huge thank you to Creative, ITC, and Arctic Wolf for making today possible. So that's it from me. Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks.
Thank you.